So this brings us all to our ultimate topic of discussion, which is test orchestration. You've built all this test automation. You've got it ready to integrate into your DevOps environment. But how do you manage the many dependencies, the many complexities of your overall test suite execution? And I'm going to say, the test orchestration is a layer on top of your automation that lets you do that. And there are a number of discussions you'll find talking about test orchestration, and not everybody has the same set of capabilities sort of subsumed under this topic. But four that I think you'll see frequently are test management, test planning, test execution, and test analytics. And I'll talk briefly about each of these and how they help you manage your automated testing and improve your DevOps environment. So if we start off with test management, this capability is all about taking the test cases that you've built up, this growing library of tests of various sorts, whether they be unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, and start to organize them into test suites that you're able to use to target specific needs, specific schedules, etc. So for example, you may have a test suite that you build specifically for a release that is focused on just the features that are coming out in that release. That makes sense to run while you're in that sprint, making sure that the things that are supposed to be coming into the functionality of your application are actually working. And you should see that developing over time through your sprint. You may have a larger test suite, a full regression suite that goes over all the functionality of your application, and you may not have the time to run that to completion with every build, but you may want to run it every night or every week. You may have dynamic test suites that are actually not a static set of tests, but tests that fit a certain pattern. You may tag your tests so that you can identify all the tests that, let's say, test your payments API. And if you know that that's changed, maybe it's not even an API that you own, but one that a partner has, and it's changed. There's a new version. You want to make sure that that is behaving the same way. You can pull all those tests together and run them through that suite. You may have a dynamic test suite that grabs all the tests that are failed from the previous test run and runs those at the beginning to make sure that they've been fixed. That's all what we kind of see in terms of falling under the case of test management. And you can see here, this is a screenshot from our testops product, where we also in test management are able to link tests to requirements and defects and organize them that way, evaluate the coverage for tests so that we can decide how they should associate, etc. Once you've got all your tests organized and structured appropriately, the next capability that we think underlies test orchestration is test planning. Deciding, when a given test suite is going to execute, what the requirements are for executing it. Will it run periodically? Will it run every time there's a change in the underlying repository? Will it run on a simple node for running unit tests? Does it need to run on a node that has a specific browser on it and specific network connectivity because it incorporates end-to-end tests, more comprehensive tests? In addition to that, scheduling test planning should also let you understand how that testing is correlated with your release structure. So, here again, we're looking at a screenshot from our testops product, but really the notion here is that you want to be able to plan your test execution so that they are following your release plan. And by doing that, you're integrating in with your ALM or whatever system is managing that. In this case, we are connected to a Jira system for releases. And then you want to be able to, as I said earlier, take those test runs that you've defined and be able to specify what environment they require. Here you can see a number of test runs, some that have actually executed, some that have a planned execution, and those then are allocated onto environments. So you can see that we've got some tests that require specific browser versions. We've got some tests that can run on a dev server. Those are probably, well, in this case, they're API tests. We've got some tests that are running on a Circle CI environment. And we've got some tests that are actually running on a desktop tester's agent. The notion here in this section of test planning is that all of this is able to give you, as someone who's maybe a director or manager of a testing team, give some insight into what environments you need in order to get your tests executed. And of course, that then leads us into test execution. Test execution is all about actually running those tests. And today that becomes increasingly complicated because you've got multiple browser versions. You've probably got devices that you run on too, because increasingly we have mobile versions of almost every application. And your test execution capability connects your test environment to these execution environments, whether they be, you can see in the icons here, Browser Stack or Sauce Labs or Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, our partners at Katalon for device testing, or Circle CI for more simple development pipeline testing. All of these are capabilities that you may have connected to your environment, but that you need to be able to associate with tests based on the requirements of those tests. And of course, we're executing these tests not just because we can, but because we want to find out things about both the application under test and our tests themselves. And that all takes us into our fourth component of orchestration, the fourth capability of test analytics. When we're wanting to learn about the application under test, the most basic thing we want to know is, what's passing and what's failing, what's working in the application and what's not. And you can see here again in a screenshot from our testops application, an example of tests that have been run over a series of days. You can see both what's passed, what's failed, what has had errors. So they didn't fail, but maybe there was network connectivity that wasn't available, or maybe they didn't have the necessary browser installed, and so you need to update the environment, etc. We can also learn things about how our test execution is connected, importantly, to our requirements. Here you see a report from, again, our testops application showing how our test coverage corresponds to a set of requirements. The things that are red are requirements that have failing tests, and the size of those show basically the number of tests that have failed. So something big in red is something that is failing repeatedly across a number of tests. Something small in green is at least passing, but it may not have good test coverage. And then you've got colors in between. And of course, we can learn more from our tests than just, is our application working or not functionally? We can also learn about how our application is performing. In this case, you see a report on the performance of APIs in an API test. And from there, you can see whether the duration of the API response is highly variable, whether at max it's exceeding your requirements. You could also run an anomaly report to determine, even if it falls within reasonable range, does it fluctuate too much, and should you look into that API? In addition to learning about our application under test, we can learn about our tests themselves in our analytics. For example, here we can see what tests are stale and that they haven't run recently. Those may be tests that we want to consider taking out of our test suite or updating in some way. Likewise, we can see what tests are slow. So not only can we see whether the application is slow itself, but we can see, is a test taking longer than expected, even if the application itself is performing okay. We can also apply test analytics to identifying the most dreaded of test automation phenomena, and that is the flaky test. Here you can see a report from within our testops application showing tests ranked by flakiness. You can see that these tests, for various reasons, are either succeeding and then having errors, or succeeding and failing, pretty much, at a random basis, which means they're not giving you much information. And these are tests that you could focus on or remove from your test cycle until you resolve them and make them more reliable, or investigate your environment and see whether some of those failures are the result of environmental issues that you can address. Either way, it's an important thing to be tracking and something that you want to have as part of your orchestration environment. So we just talked about what we think are the 4 key capabilities underlying effective test orchestration. But more broadly, test orchestration is ultimately about connecting your system to a number of different components, from ALMs like Jira, TestRail, and Qtest, so that you can update requirements and defects with test results, to integrating with CI/CD platforms like Jenkins or Circle CI, Azure DevOps, so that you can drive your tests based on events happening in your CI/CD system, to integrating with collaboration systems like the ubiquitous Slack, increasingly ubiquitous Teams, for alerting testers or developers to events that are happening that are related to them. Collaborating through GitHub so that, again, your testers and developers can be sharing code between and amongst each other. Even our own testops platform, which helps bring together a lot of these systems. And of course, integrating with systems like Sauce Labs for BrowserStack and others for execution environments, Coty and others for access to devices to test, real devices, Applitools and other similar test tools for, in Applitool's case, visual testing, but others implementing things like test impact analysis and more. We'll be seeing more and more solutions in the overall testing and quality environment, and this ability to integrate them into a platform is going to become increasingly important. So that brings us to the end of this talk. In summary, let's just review a little bit of what we talked about. So we started this whole discussion talking about DevOps, what it is, why it's so important today. We identified the increasing pace of delivery that is necessary for us to get value to our customers, how DevOps supports that, and how it's ever increasing in its velocity and its complexity as we have applications deployed that have greater and greater internal capacity, and also a greater interconnectivity with other applications to create solutions. We talked then about how DevOps and the success of DevOps is more than just getting our applications from their source repositories into production so that we can test in production. It's about being able to get them into production safely and being able to learn and test and learn about application quality before production and in production. We talked about how testing can become a bottleneck, particularly when it depends on manual testing, because DevOps depends on so much automation that not automating tests means it's bound to be a bottleneck. We then realize that that automation can become a new bottleneck in and of itself. Your success in automation can create enough automation scripts, enough new software for testing that becomes a bottleneck as you try to execute that effectively. That led us to talking about test orchestration and how that can create a layer on top of your test automation where you're able to manage your tests, construct them into test suites that are built and optimized for various functions, plan the execution of those suites across specific execution environments based on activity in your source code, repository, etc. Of course, execute those test suites on execution environments based on the requirements of a given test suite. And finally, perform reporting and analytics based on the results that you've collected from those test executions, and learn from all of that. Learn about how the application itself is performing, what's passing, what's failing, how your tests are performing, what's slow, what's flaky, what is out of date, and how important all of that is to effectively integrating tests into your DevOps pipeline. And along the way, we looked a little bit at Katalon testops and how it supports those test orchestration capabilities of management, planning, execution, and analytics. I hope that you've been able to take something away from this. I hope you've learned a little bit. I've enjoyed talking about it, and I hope we can stay in touch. I just want to say thank you for coming to this talk. It was my great pleasure to put this together and present it. I hope you were able to learn something. If any of it sounded interesting, please can get a copy of the white paper that I referenced several times in here. And you can talk to other people from Katalon about our products. You can book a demo online. You can visit our website, and there you'll find information not just about our products, but about testing in general. And finally, please feel free to stay connected with me. I've put my LinkedIn information there. I'm easy to find. My name is pretty easy to Google, and I'd love to hear from you. Take care.